Hey everybody, thank you for listening here on the CLNS Media Network. Hope you enjoyed last week's pod with NBA TV's Sekou Smith. Today I've got another awesome guest. He's somebody I've been trying to get on the podcast for a long time. We're finally able to connect here. Albert Breer. Albert's the senior NFL reporter and lead content strategist for Sports Illustrated's Monday Morning Quarterback. He's had an amazing career that we're going to jump into here. Let me bring him in. Albert Breer, welcome to Terrific Talk.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. I heard you once say that in order to be great at something, you need to love it. Where did your love for sports and reporting come from?
I'd say probably my dad. I mean, I grew up playing every sport, watching every sport. You know, really that was, a result of my dad exposing me to all of that. You know, I think as much as anything else, I really gravitated towards football because that's what he played, and he's from Michigan. He went to Michigan. I think a big part of why I love football so much is because, I sort of were, a lot of people I grew up around, were from the Northeast, and, baseball, basketball, all the other sports are really popular there.
Yeah.
I really had background where, football was what I gravitated towards. So I loved all sports. And, I read the Boston Globe sports section and all of that when I was a kid, but I really, from a pretty early age, gravitated towards football.
Was being a football reporter something that you knew you wanted to do early on?
Yeah, I would say so. It's actually a funny story. I played high school football. I didn't have very good grades in high school. I was kind of a little bit of a knucklehead. And, I think part of it for my parents was we got to figure out how to get our kid focused. And, my dad sort of brought up the idea, well, hey, while you're playing, couldn't you also, write about football? And I always thought like I wanted to coach or maybe I wanted to become a GM someday. I never really thought about getting into the media side of it. So, he called the newspaper in town and they let me write a couple of stories of the football team and that I was playing on. And then they said, well, you're pretty decent at this, so why don't we have you do this? And, maybe write a story about the girls basketball team in my high school or hockey team or whatever it was. And I was getting paid, which was nice. It was like $50 a story for a high school kid. That's not bad. And so I just sort of got better and better at it. And, by the time I got out of by the time high school was winding down, I sort of decided that I wanted to pursue it. And so I think it was sort of a convergence of, how much I love sports and knowing I wanted to work in sports from a pretty early age to, like, all right, now I found something that I can actually be pretty decent at and that I've made some progress in. And the key for me was that everything just sort of happened naturally.
Nice. So you kind of wrote your own stuff there in high school. Then you studied journalism at Ohio State. What was your first job out of college?
So my first job out of college actually didn't end well. My first full-time job out of college was as a copy editor at the Asbury Park Press. And I actually lost that job because I skipped work one night to watch the national championship game because Ohio State was in it.
Oh, wow.
I honestly didn't like that job. Like, and I'll be completely honest with you about it. I knew I wanted to be a reporter or a writer. I never really wanted to, at that point at least, never wanted to be an editor. And so, I was, my days off, I believe, were like Tuesday and Wednesday, and I was working till 2 a.m. every night. And I was fine with that as long as I was making progress towards what I wanted to do, and that just wasn't happening there. The newspaper company that I'd actually started at when I was in high school and that I worked for, during breaks in college, I decided to go back there because I knew they believed in me.
Yeah.
Believed that I had something, and so really for me it was all right. Like, how can I start writing more and do more reporting and all of that kind of stuff? And the thing that made the most sense to me was to go to a place where I felt like there was an investment in me, and I didn't. There wasn't a full-time job waiting for me either. And they told me when I decided to come back, and this was going from New Jersey to Massachusetts, I would have to wait. and I would have to wait for something to come open, and even then nothing was guaranteed. So I spent 8-9 months busting my ass as a stringer, just doing whatever anyone asked me to do, from, covering, lacrosse or covering hockey and this is high schools, of course, to picking up the phone on the desk at night, taking box scores, and helping put the paper out at night. And, so I did that for 8 or 9 months. The job came open. I wound up getting it. And so that, of course, is a huge step for me.
Yeah.
It was, I was 3 days a week I was working for the Daily. And then the other 2 days a week I was putting out weekly town papers. So it was the Wellesley Townsman and the Need of Time. And so that was sort of, how I got my first full-time job, where I actually decided to stick with it, which I think at that point I was about 24 years old.
Wow. I think that's a great, kind of story for younger people to hear. Like, just being an example of being flexible enough to go in and, do whatever kind of stories they want you to cover, not being picky.
And hey, one of the things for me was I did TV internships when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a feeling, and I think one of the smart things I did, and I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger, but one of the smart things I did was I sort of could see that, like, the lines between print and broadcast were getting blurry. And I could also tell the economics of the business weren't really working. And that, as jobs started to go away, you need to do everything. Like, whoever was the reporter on the scene would have to do everything. So, I wrote for the school newspaper. That was part of my major in college. But then I did broadcast internships. And so I think initially that may have set me back a little bit, that I hadn't done the big newspaper internships the way some people had. But it did set me up for later on where, I had experience on both ends. And I think the big key for me was just, honestly, not saying no to anything, and I think that's what when I say you have to love it, that's sort of what I mean is I didn't have a problem saying yes to doing whatever they wanted me to do, because I really liked doing it. I really liked going out, and beyond just, loving sports, it was also, I liked interacting with people, and I liked building relationships, and I liked getting information that other people didn't have. And, so, it was a job, and there were some things that weren't great about it. The hours, what I did my social life, my 20s, certainly part of that.
Yeah.
But the big key was that a lot of what I was doing didn't really feel like work.
That's the key. You mentioned early on, it's cool. You were doing the print side of things, but also paying attention to the broadcasting. You're doing that today. Like, one thing I noticed is just how many different platforms you're on. You got the website. Yeah. You're doing podcasts, videos on Periscope. You're tweeting. There's so many different platforms today to reach people. How do you kind of organize your time and prioritize where you want to put things out?
It's hard. It's definitely hard. One thing I've learned, though, and I see this with my kids now, and how they consume content, and they're 4 years old. I just think that we've never been more fragmented. The people who follow sports and how they follow sports has never been different from person to person, and so one person might like to read the morning paper, the other person might like to read on the internet. Maybe somebody else wants to listen on a podcast in their car. Someone else likes to click on a video. Someone else likes to watch on TV.
Yeah.
I just think it would be silly of me to pigeonhole myself into one thing. And I want to be able to reach people in different ways. And I want to be able to give people different opportunities to get to my content and to get what I'm putting out. So I've always felt like it was really, really, really important, personally, for me to be as good as many things as I possibly could be, and be as flexible as I possibly could be in how I deliver the different types of content that I deliver. And so it's hard to divide your time sometimes. My Sundays in the fall are difficult because I'm doing television and I'm putting out the Monday column.
Right.
And there's definitely some sacrifice you have to make, but I think you make yourself more valuable the more things you can do. And I think it's silly to pigeonhole yourself into one thing or the other. I'm 39 years old, And I have to do that. I can't imagine somebody who's 22 or 23 not thinking that way.
Totally. You mentioned you've got kids. I wanted to just quickly ask you about the work-life balance. I mean, it's different for everybody. Yeah. Your job obviously requires a ton of hours. How have you been able to make that work-life balance work for you?
That honestly has been a little. It's interesting because I almost feel like having kids has helped to streamline my life, in a certain way. And I know it sounds funny, but it's like literally like almost all of what I do is either I'm with the kids or I'm working.
Yeah.
And I mean, that'll probably change as they get a little older, but it's really simplified everything for me, and that's not to say I can't go out with my friends one night or do this some other night, but it's just for the most part, everything that I do is focused on those two things. And so, I was really worried about that because of how much I put into my job. I'm lucky to have a very understanding wife who happens to be a nurse. So, the idea that somebody be working nights and weekends doesn't bother her either. And for my kids, I just, I try to make sure they know that I'm committed to them too. When I'm around them, I'm around them. I grew up with parents who, my mom was a real estate agent. She worked nights and weekends, and my dad traveled for work. So I dealt with everything that my kids are going to see me do.
Yeah.
As they grow up, and so really, I know a lot of people look at that and say, "God, it must be weird not to be able to do this or that." I mean, you make it work as you go along, and I honestly think that having kids has sort of simplified things for me.
While I have you here, I just wanted to ask you what you thought of the new NFL pass interference rule here. Their coaches can now challenge pass interference calls.
I'm all for getting it right.
Okay.
That's the thing, is I'm all for getting it right. And so I think, there are going to be some unintended consequences, but I do think that, anything they can do to get those right, because those are impactful penalties, is important. Here's the thing, is I think one of the things that they need to clean up, and this, I think would impact how pass interference is adjudicated in these situations. I think they absolutely need to do a better job of making the replay review what it was supposed to be in the first place, which is it has to be obvious. It has to be overwhelming evidence. And I think part of the issue, as the refs have come under more criticism, as the product on television has gotten better, we've been able to see more angles and see everything from a clearer view. I think the officials have sort of become, I don't want to say they have rabbit ears over it, but they've become, I think, a little bit more attuned to how the public sees them and that criticism. And so I think it's gone from what has to be, 99-1 or 95-5 for you to overturn a call to now we're seeing some 60-40 and 55-45 calls getting overturned. And so what I'd like to see is I'd like to see them put a shot clock on the replay. Because if you can't change something, if you can't see it in 30 seconds, I'd say it's not obvious. It doesn't meet that standard. And so I think the idea of getting calls right and changing pass interference and being able to review pass interference, being able to review everything, I think that's good. I think what's important here is that, replay is used in the way it was intended and that it's only to overturn very, very obvious misses. And so, I think one way to do that would be to put a shot clock on it, make it so you really have 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it is, to overturn a call. If you can't do it that fast, then it's probably not obvious enough to be overturned anyway.
I think the shot clock is a brilliant idea, and it's a thing where it won't necessarily slow the game down too much if they keep it to 30 seconds like that.
Right.
Like it a lot. Albert, this was great. Thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
You got it, Tom.
Everybody make sure to go check out Albert's great work. Follow him on Twitter. His handle is @AlbertBreer. All right, guys. Thank you again for listening to the pod. Hope you liked it. If you missed last week's pod with NBA TV Sekou Smith, you can go check that out. Got a lot of big stuff coming up on Terrific Talk, so be on the lookout for that. If you have time, please subscribe to Terrific Talk on iTunes. Leave a review. Definitely appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Kobe.